Hello, lovely to see your friendly faces today. I'm a little bit nervous, so I may speak quickly to begin with, but I will get into it. So just bear with me, okay? So my name is David Hunter. I'm the CEO and director of the Habitat People. A little bit about us: we're a rewilding firm based right here in Northeast Scotland. We make habitat. Basically, that's the be all and end all of it. That's for anyone and everyone. Well, not everyone, but large number of people. We manage about 650 acres of biodiversity. That's from councils, private landowners, again, almost anyone and everyone, really. Very much on the ground work. So yesterday I was helping build a bird hide. The day before that, I was helping to collect seed from some nationally threatened plant species. I am the guy who sits on the ground, talks to people, actually in the field, doing stuff. That's my natural habitat. It's being out there, talking to people on the ground, in the wild. Talking about, from the last excellent talk, we are people who represent nature at the table, if you like. If you've got people who've got projects and they say, hey, we want to have more biodiversity in it, we want to do more things. We, the people, say, okay, well, this is the good bits of nature, this is the bad bits of nature. That's where we go around. That's my boss, basically. If I don't support nature and support nature in the way that, is beneficial for it, I'm in trouble. So really, that's my end goal. I'm not holding to profit or loss. I don't make any money. I'm very much, we are in a mass extinction event. Has anyone said the words mass extinction event this morning? Out of curiosity? No. We are in a mass extinction event. We have been for the last 200 years. I think it's really important to recognize that and use it along terms like climate crisis. We have lost the vast majority of wildlife across the world at the moment, and we have to do something about it. And hopefully, all you lovely people here can be helping to do something about that. But I think it's worth recognizing the fact that we are in a mass extinction event. We're going through what's called total biosphere collapse, which is really fun. Don't worry, I'll get more positive in a minute. But again, these are serious terms for serious times, and it's worth, nature recovery is a lovely thing to say. Really, we need resurgent nature in order to not have large-scale collapse, and I think it's worth recognizing that now, so that when we talk about the conflict issues I'm about to go into, we're talking about, there are species on the line. There are people who are really affected in real life, large communities who are impacted, and this is quite a serious topic in that regard. That slide has nothing. I think that's white text on there. Well done for the translation to PowerPoint, and that's fine. So what this should say is wildlife conflict. I'm talking about different issues here. So we're talking about misunderstandings. So maybe things that you want to do with nature around it, but people aren't going to be happy about misunderstanding it. We're talking about anger and outrage about some of the issues to do with biodiversity, and understandably so. And then outright, complete, this is not going to happen at all. You're never gonna happen. And so I'm gonna go through some of these different types of issues, some examples, some of the ways we approach it. And then maybe I've got a couple of other little things actually I'd like to touch at the end as well. But yeah, we'll get into it there. Okay, so 4 species of bird. What do they have in common? Other than the fact they're birds and they've got beaks, etc. Any guesses? Interactive, scary. They're all at risk of extinction. So every single bird species on there. So wood pigeon and rook, get many back gardens. They are, as of this year, nationally threatened. Rook has declined by 50% in the last 15 years. Wood pigeon has declined by 30% over the same window. Herring gull, we might still have them in 2050. 2060-ish. Starling declined by 93% in farmland areas. These are all species that people say, oh, they're common, they're fine. We used to have flocks of literally millions of starlings. We now see, very small numbers. So even in a very urban setting, I'm depressing you all. I'm sorry. Nature is depressing at the moment. We're trying to do something about it. But it's worth knowing these things. Anyway, so again, white text, fantastic. It was black when I sent this through, but obviously the translation has no. That's fine. We're going to talk about herring gulls, very controversial species in Aberdeen. Who here likes gulls? Yeah, there's a few hands. That's more than I usually get. That's good. Gulls are a very misunderstood species in that they eat chips and then eat salmon sandwiches. Speaking of my mother last week, actually. Herring gulls are an estuarine species. They naturally live in seabird colonies. They have large, very complex social networks alongside where the puffins, the guillemots, the razorbills live. And they're what's called kleptoparasites. So what that means is they steal food from other birds. In the same way they steal food from us. It's a naturally evolved trait. And because the puffins and the guillemots and the razorbills aren't doing very well, and they haven't got very much food, it means it's much harder for them to get food for their chicks. So why would you, this bird can live to 45, 50, okay? They are seriously long-lived animals. Why would you stay at a seabird colony where there's no food, when there's a chippy up the road, where you can get free food for your starving chicks for free? So herring gulls breed in cities. Maybe think, oh, there's so many more of them. Actually, what we're seeing is a migration from the natural colonies into the human settlement and an increase in the conflict between humans and wildlife as a result of diminishing food supplies in their natural resource. They are literally starving to death. You see them begging for food, you see them scrounging for food. That's not because they want to. They'd be much rather have the big crab or a sand eel from a puffin or even fishing themselves. It's because they literally do not have any other option. And so putting into context the fact they're stealing your chips or they are causing mess can be a very difficult thing. So what I'm proposing with herring gulls and a couple of the places we're working with is having designated herring gull breeding zones. So we try and stop them from breeding in the areas where it's not necessarily sanitary, it's not good for them to be in, and we have spaces where they can recreate their natural colonies. And perhaps we're looking at fish offcuts for supplementary feeding to get them over this gap until hopefully we restore their ecosystems enough that they can all go back to where they want to be. Meadows, another one. Who has built a meadow in the last few years? Few hands, fantastic, great, glad to hear it. Meadows are a wonderful resource. They're a fantastic space. We've lost 97% of our meadows in the last 100 years, but they are in a bit of a resurgence. They are very pretty. So this one is from Urban West Hill, a site called Prime 4 Business Park that we manage on behalf of them. And it's a grassland. So that means that 60 to 7% of a meadow 60 to 70% of a meadow is made of grass, okay? That's the kind of bread that holds the butter together. What a meadow isn't, is that. And it's slightly grayed up with the pictures, but it's poppies, cornflowers, corn marigolds, that kind of stuff. This is very much what you'd see, for example, after World War I, when they had all the shelling and, you know, the poppy is the traditional symbol. These are a disturbed grassland species. And once that area is no longer disturbed, these species will disappear and you'll end up with lots of ragwort and thistles and lank grasses, and it won't look very nice and it won't actually support very much biodiversity. So really, meadows are a complicated habitat that takes a long time, you know, around 5 years to get a stable meadow, and is almost entirely perennial species. Now, when you talk to the public, that's what they want to see. They want to see a field of color, okay? And that's great for about 5 pollinator species, but it doesn't actually support very much other biodiversity. With that, they're eating the leaves, they're eating the roots, they're having a lot more pollen availability for a lot longer as well. So you're supporting more biodiversity for a longer period of time, but it isn't flowering all year round, and it's not necessarily as pretty. And so having conversations with local communities and saying, well, look, your poppies are great, but actually this is a lot better, and in 5 years' time it will be great, and having that kind of longer term discussion about how it's going to be managed, how you can integrate, you know, can you have a cutting regime within the place that's being created, is a conversation that's well worth having, and actually a lot more rewarding when year on year you see more birds using the space, you see more insects using the space, and it provides more of a journey to the people that are living and working in that area than a one-off, oh, that's pretty, we've got a couple of bees, but actually not going to get very much pollen, and only 2 species eat the leaves. And you might actually get ground nesting birds in there as well. So you're providing for higher trophic levels of the ecosystem. And that's something I think hopefully can be replicated, and I need to speed up, okay. Again, some of the issues, I've made this talk way too long. Issues like ticks, litter, unwanted species along grass also have issues with meadows as well. Again, this is a matter of social responsibility and then education. Oh, wrong way. Education, education, and education. The other 3 issues there are not necessarily large conflict zones. All right, I'll skip trees. So you see a headline, major university plans to clear fell 10 hectares of mature native broadleaf woodland nature protected site. Hands up if you're mortified at that statement. A few hands, okay. I'd be mortified if I read that, but this is supposedly mature broadleaf woodland. As you can see, it's very open, hardly any of the trees have survived, but from a statutory standpoint, that is woodland, because 20 years ago, it was planted up as such. It's actually a massive carbon sink, so this is a site owned by a local university just over the river that we are restoring as wetland, and 300 years ago, this site was wetland. And so this headline does not yet exist, but if we did the project wrong, that's what would come out. So what we need to do is we're setting the groundwork, we're creating videos, we're talking to the students who, if they found out their university was felling a load of woodlands, would be really upset to actually have this headline. Major university restores historic wetlands by removing inappropriate tree species, and actually planting trees in the wrong place will release an awful lot of CO2, saving 100,000 tons of CO2 from being released and saving numerous nationally endangered species. So trying to make sure that when you're doing work like this, sometimes it can look a bit controversial on the offset, but making sure you're having that conversation with people to have positivity. I don't know if I'm out of time now. Is that it? Ish, yeah, okay. I've got loads of other stuff I was going to say. I've made this talk way too long, but that's all right. Long story short, you really need to talk to people, and you need to engage with ecologists and people that can help guide that, hopefully. I'm sure you all do that already because you're at this conference, but yeah, just rambling through stuff. Gonna skip that for the moment. And you can end up with some really, really good sites. Prime 4, as I mentioned before, we have cattle in an urban business park that are free roaming. They are open to the public to interact with. We have very visible species that the people in the business park can sponsor. So we've got barn owls. They're going out and looking at that kind of stuff. Literally, you know, we've got big offices, meadows next to them. They can go out and enjoy it. And we're having really positive interactions from that work. Although when we started it, there was a lot of tense, oh, you know, we want the grass cut short. Are we sure about this? But now, a few years in, those people are saying, oh yeah, just drop me an email and say, oh yeah, got some butterflies on the window. That's really nice. And starting to build up that journey with them on a positive note, but it does take time. There we go. I've blitzed through that. I'm sorry about that. Yeah, thank you very much. Very happy to work with any of you if you want to chat, but yeah.
All right, and the starlings that are endangered here comes back to the storytelling. They're now over in the States, and there's a man named Eugene who in 90 or 91, he moved over to the States, and he dearly loved Shakespeare. And so he wanted to have all of the species of birds mentioned in Shakespeare in the States. And so he released 100 starlings in 1890, and now they are a massive problem, invasive species. There are millions of starlings in the States. So we should talk about invasive species later, because it's not good species, bad species, it's just ecosystem out of balance. But it does come back to the storytelling. Sometimes if you're working on science or adding to policy, you need to have the evidence, the data backing. So that's what we're going to talk about. I'm an ecologist with the Botanic Gardens. I also specialize in lichens, so it means I'm looking at connections in the ecosystem. And while lichens aren't the talk today, that fondness for epiphytes does mean I'm always looking at foundational, functional pieces and how a system radiates out. And we apply that to nature-based solutions and restoring the ecosystem in the garden. So some of what we do at RBGE, we work to, it's coming back, to explore, conserve, and explain the world of plants. And we're in a very unique role as a botanic garden, because we have more than 1 million visitors yearly, and we're trusted by those visitors of the general public. So the things that we do, the messages that we're sending out, they're taken in and acted on by the general public. We're also a scientific and academic institution. So we advise on consultations with the Scottish government. We work with organizations within our own city, wider Scotland, and internationally. And we're a trusted messenger for them too. So with that trust from all these different levels comes a lot of responsibility to do it appropriately whenever we do take action and to share that message out. Oh, and some of that research actually happens right on the grounds that you wouldn't know about. So these are little water avens. We have them next to wood avens, and we'll plant them in dry conditions, in wet conditions, and we watch how they hybridize for future adaptation. Or there's work happening, out in the field in the Cairngorm. So it's all over. And then we have, I think it's 3 million species in our herbarium. So come and visit us in Edinburgh. All right, so when we started doing nature-based solutions, because like everybody else, we're experiencing climate change, we had to look at how do we make that happen. So that was with evidence-backed nature-based solutions. This is a walking path in the garden. It gets flooded every time we have even the smallest bit of rain, because there's a hill over on this side on the birch lawn, and it would just cascade down, and we would have to shut this path. So it's a definite problem. But being botanists, we thought we'll fix it with plants. So these are, and we had to do that through nature-based thinking, which I won't spend a lot of time on, but you can read up on, and it's not nature for people, which would be nature-based solutions, but it's nature with people in it. So you're part of that ecosystem, which a lot of the speakers have talked about today. So we do have a weather station on the grounds of RBGE, and we track what's happening with our weather. And we know it's getting a little more erratic, but it's in the patterns of what we're seeing. So we are getting more rain year over year, but it's when we get that rain. We're having wetter winters and drier springs right at the time when the plants need all of that water. We're also getting stretches of dry weather in the middle of all of those storms. So instead of steady rain every 2-3 days, we're getting 8-9 days of dry weather, which stresses out the plants, dries out the ground, and then you get a deluge of rain where you have, the amount of rain that would have fallen over 8 hours is falling within 30 minutes. So it's the intensity of the rain that's also making a difference. This was that flooded birch lawn, and it is now a rain garden. So that tree right there, that's the large tree you're seeing in the aerial view on this side. So we dug out a depression, and we took that dirt that we dug out, dumped it right next to it to create a berm. So just mechanically, you gave the water coming down the hill a place to settle, and then if it was really strong water, having the berm next to it means that it could slosh up, fall back down. Now it has a place to go and can sink in. We modified the soil, and we did 2 different mixes of soils. Sorry. So one was what is recommended in the SUDS manual, Sustainable Urban Drainage Systems. So you're bringing in gravel and sand for a higher proportion of brought-in material to increase infiltration. But that also can be expensive because you're bringing in more material. So we also did a second section with a higher ratio of the native organic soil. And then, because we're also scientists, we can't just point at the rain garden during a storm and say it works, which it does, but we also track it. So we have soil moisture sensors at 2 different levels in the rain garden. So you can see where moisture is happening at the surface level and deeper underground. We have leaf wetness sensors. You can start looking at transpiration, what's happening with the plants. We can even look at coverings, so stone versus mulch covering, and look at the temperature of the ground, what's happening, which has actually been really interesting in the past few years because we're seeing that, yes, the stone helps things in the spring. When it's cold, it warms up the ground faster, and so the plants can come up better. But it also means that we're getting hotter stretches in the summer that are more than Scotland is used to having. And the stones heat up too much, and they're radiating heat, and it's scorching the plants that are growing over top of that radiating heat. So you can use that information to adaptively manage and either put something that shades where you have the stones, or move the stones over to where you have mulch, where it's too wet and moist and cold. So it's adaptive management. And we use that info. So what you're seeing here are some examples of it. The orange is wetness at different depths. The blue is one level of the soil moisture sensors on different dates. And then the center one, you're seeing penetration in the lawn, the berm, the gravel, the mulch. But it's all, you can't just gather the data and then have it there on your computer, because it takes a lot of people. You have the scientists in the lab, you have the horticulturists out on the grounds, you have the grounds crew, you have the executive management teams, you have our estates teams that are working on the facilities and the paths that would normally be managing the drainage systems and such. All of those teams have to work together. So to be able to actually employ nature-based solutions that would be effective, we needed to build it into the foundation of RBGE itself. So it's not a single department that works on nature-based solutions. So we have the nature-based solutions team, which is myself and my colleague, Dr. Emma Bush, and we created the nature-based solutions working group. So that has oh no, it's dark. Okay, well, that has the heads of departments for nature-based solutions, for the horticulture, estates, digital enterprise, interpretation, education, and several others, so that we meet quarterly and we sit and talk about nature-based solutions and how it's affecting all of our work, because it's not a single enterprise or a single device. It's a way of continuing to do our work of conserving, exploring, and explaining the world of plants in a way that works for a changing world. So we start with looking at the latest research, and we see, okay, what's come out lately? What does that mean for our field? Does it change our direction? And then we can use that to adaptively manage. So this is from the Nature Conservancy. It's on how to fail faster, better, which means you're going to continuously change. It's basically the scientific method, but put into live practice for the data, for the on-the-ground work, for everything. We also found that you had some discrepancies between how the science department worked and how the action actually happened on the grounds. So we created a NBS on the grounds team, which consisted of people from science and people from Hort. And we actually go out into the grounds and we have like summit meetings at each station. So we would go to the rain garden and stand there and talk about the management of it. What plants do we need to change? What does the science tell us about how this is functioning to do flood mitigation? What are the man hours that are being spent by Hort if we change a practice? How can we address the rest of the ecosystem? So the climate crisis or the problems in the urban system for humans don't happen independently of things like the biodiversity crisis. So one of the things we do with the rain garden is it no longer gets a really harsh British haircut in the winter. It used to get, just cut down to the ground, which is great for helping things come back in the winter. But now, instead of being chopped to the ground, it gets cut. Oh goodness. Sorry about that. Oh. Well, you can just look at adaptive management for the moment. Instead of being chopped down to the ground, it gets cut to about this high so that in the winter you have dead stems that are left for things like cavity nesting native bees. Because if you aren't providing that winter habitat, you are only going to have visitors. You know, we call them pollinators, but it means we're defining them by their job as adults. Insects have an entire life system, and if you aren't providing that winter habitat, then the only insects, only pollinators you're getting in the summertime with all our big, beautiful flowers are visitors from far away because you don't have winter habitat. So things like that, changing the height for cutting, tiny difference for humans, tiny difference visually, huge, huge difference for biodiversity and what's happening for other elements of the ecosystem. We saw our management systems happen in real time. The NBS on the grounds team happened to be out in the grounds having a little summit meeting at the rain garden, and the sky opened on us. So this is our little cloudburst. It was 11 mils of water, which is not that much, but it fell in 8 minutes, just dumped. So it caused massive, massive problems all over the garden, except I will point out at the rain garden. It held everything. I will say on the rain garden, we put it in 6 years ago in that place that used to flood. It has not flooded since. We have not watered it since, except for there was one watering in 2022 when we had that drought, 1 day of watering. And that was it. It only gets watered by the rain. So it solved our flooding problem. It saves money because we don't irrigate, and it created a new feature for visitors. So win, win, win all around. I don't know why we don't do more of this everywhere. So here's some of what we ran into with that just 11 mils of water, but happening quickly. Okay. We had water blisters in the lawn. So old drains, they're not designed. The specs that we still use for drains are not able to handle what's coming down now. So it actually lifted up like a waterbed, and you could poke it, and it kind of went like this. And then there's me summoning it out of the ground when the water blister popped. So we knew we had to make some changes. And that's members of the HORT team who saw it happen in real time. So estates saw water inundation to every building we have on site. And this is a quote from our sustainability manager saying, we actually have to make some of these changes. So it's one of my favorites to share. So did some of the science. These are hydrology mapping with Heriot-Watt University to show water flow paths in the garden so that we knew where things needed to happen. There it is again. So that's mapping the 11 mil dump of water and seeing where you get water pooling. And it tells us where we need to make some changes and put in some new systems. On the science side, we're taking some of those on the ground actions, and we have our Plants with Purpose research program, which sees its first PhD student joining this Tuesday. And we'll be doing research in the labs on ecological and functional traits of plants and out in the grounds. And it's leading us to changes in the garden, involving all of the teams that work forward to the future. So this is that path right there, that flooding happened in 4 minutes. 4 minutes during that storm that dropped that water. And instead of putting in more drains, which is what we would have done in the past, Estates was there as part of the MBS on the grounds and saw this is not sufficient. And so we're now looking at creating a wadi, a dry riverbed that will be planted up, and it will look beautiful. It will be something for visitors to come and see. But during a rainstorm, it will collect that water on the edge of the path and then run it into this dry riverbed that will fill with water and be an actual stream. So just yesterday, we did the GPS differential mapping between Horton Science to get an accurate elevation to design these new changes for the garden. So big things coming. You can reach me. You can reach myself and Emma from the office, and we'd love to hear from you. Thanks.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Hopefully somebody will let me know if you can't hear. Okay, I will carry on. Many thanks for inviting me to your conference today. Great, thanks, Marco. So yeah, many thanks for the invitation for today. I'm sorry I wasn't able to join in person, but I am delighted to be part of your event and to have had the opportunity to hear what my fellow speakers have shared this morning. Presentations were fascinating and very thought-provoking. As Lo mentioned, at LSE, I'm supporting the EU Naturance project, and I'll explain more on that in a moment. I'm afraid my presentation is a lot less colourful than what we've been treated to so far, and I have no actual pictures of nature. But I do ask whether nature-based solutions are the answer to urban flooding. And I hope that's a pertinent question for this audience, given your respective roles as architects, designers, and built environment professionals in the design of communities, environments, and much else besides. So I'd like to stimulate thinking on whether the case can be made for integrating the protection and restoration of biodiversity and flood management to enhance urban resilience. Indeed, I'd like to test some key messages and recommendations that we're actively considering as part of my current project at LSE. More on that later. Next slide, please. But first, let me provide some background on the Naturance project. So it was established by the EU Horizon Europe Research and Innovation Framework, and it aims to examine the technical, financial and operational feasibility and performance of nature-based solutions from an insurance and investment perspective. And the initiative facilitates in-depth discussions with our knowledge network to explore synergies and gather views on feasible instruments and the conditions for their success. And this includes consideration of equitable access to the benefits these solutions provide and the transferability of successful pilots to other geographic and policy areas. I seem to have lost the slides. Hopefully you will get them back, but I will keep going. The project is ultimately looking to inform policy and decision makers with actionable insights from investigation and analysis of what works and what could work. And LSE is one of 9 consortium partners supporting the project, and our core role is to facilitate a series of innovation labs. And innovation labs essentially offer a collaborative environment where interested stakeholders with relevant expertise come together for the purposes of challenging the status quo and innovating impactful new solutions. The innovation labs directly contribute to the overall objective of the Naturance project, and their impact is influenced by the diversity of the stakeholder group participating, how effectively the target audience will be reached with the lab's findings, and ultimately how successful we are in informing policy and decision makers. And we're about 2 years into the 3.5-year journey. Next slide, please. So with that being said, how might we think about climate adaptation and resilience in a new way, and what could we do differently as a result? And this is hopefully somewhat visible, but at its simplest, I would suggest viewing all projects from the perspective of future generations. And I think that sentiment is well aligned with what we're all ultimately trying to achieve. Next slide, please. So I mentioned that LSE's core role on the Naturance project is to facilitate a series of innovation labs. And LSE also led one of those innovation labs on investing in natural flood management in urban areas in the UK and looked at a number of related considerations and challenges. So starting with the current state of urban natural flood management, nature-based solutions are new and vital, but unproven to a degree. So there's a lack of data on their effectiveness, notwithstanding what Kaylin has just demonstrated, and their performance under present day and future environmental conditions. And given those constraints, it's difficult to justify their consideration as part of local authorities' decision-making processes, which don't systematically consider the co-benefits and equity aspects. So successfully addressing the associated data constraints would ideally involve complex modeling, but of course this comes at a cost. We also looked at the role insurance can play in facilitating investment in nature-based solutions, both as investor and underwriter. And as underwriter, the insurer's role is essentially to de-risk the investment. With nature-based solutions, we're often dealing with a public good in the sense that it's difficult or impossible to exclude users, and thus the NBS can't be priced and sold to create a revenue stream. The question then is whether private funding can be motivated by public subsidies and regulations that require NBS as an addition to already bankable ventures. Next slide, please. So a new biodiversity net gain legislation came into effect in England whilst the LSE Innovation Lab was underway. And given the close alignment with the Innovation Lab topic, we decided to pivot toward production of a policy brief on biodiversity net gain and how it could amplify urban flood risk management. Next slide, please. So the biodiversity net gain legislation came into effect in England in February this year. It's an approach to development and land management that aims to leave the natural environment in a measurably better state. So when developers undertake a project in England, the new legislation mandates that they provide a minimum of 10% BNG by the end of the development. And the habitat they create or enhance must be maintained for a minimum of 30 years. And the objective of the new legislation is to establish standardized practices for developers to create and improve habitats, and applies a consistent metric using habitat as a proxy to bring about a quantifiable measure for biodiversity gain. And a hierarchy approach is taken whereby biodiversity improvements should first be considered within the project's designated boundaries in order to contribute directly to the local ecosystem and surrounding environment. So why should this be of interest for those of you working in the Scottish context, given this legislation is not mandatory there? Well, we looked at a case study in the city of Hull, which adopted the BNG principles before it became mandatory. And it's worth noting that some local planning authorities also already required it. And Hull recognised that NBS, such as the creation of urban green spaces, parks and wetlands, can contribute to flood mitigation while enhancing urban biodiversity. And such integration could provide multifunctional benefits, improving both the environment and the quality of urban life. Next slide, please. So despite criticism of the former UK government's backtracking on the environmental agenda, the new legislation is quite a progressive policy that is likely to play a crucial role in restoring and preserving nature, and could underpin a boost to flood management efforts by encouraging spaces for nature that bring a range of benefits, including in an urban context. However, apparent limited awareness of the new requirement and only superficial familiarity with BNG highlight the need for a deeper understanding and for more strategic application in urban planning. So whilst the BNG legislation is now enacted, there is uncertainty about what the future flood risk management and planning framework will look like, but also, I guess, the opportunity to get it right. Next slide, please. And just to put this into context, flooding is the #1 natural hazard in the UK. So seizing the opportunity this new legislation brings is critical as part of wider national and local efforts to build resilience to flood risk. It will need a deeper understanding of BNG's potential to enhance urban resilience, but also a mobilisation of this knowledge into actionable strategies that can be adopted by policymakers, urban planners, and community stakeholders. And investments that are now required by law could be channeled to lead to co-benefits, which could be economic, social, and environmental. For example, I understand Glasgow's new urban forests have planted 18 million trees to avert 100 million of flooding damage. And the trees are an integral part of the city's sewage system, flood defence and air quality regulation, which also contribute to improved mental and physical health through the creation of green spaces and nature reserves. So whilst the integration of BNG-related activities could unlock its full potential and enhance flood management projects' likelihood of long-term success, in an urban context, access to more small urban parcels is needed. Next slide, please. But of course, there are challenges to be addressed. So we need innovative approaches to embed B&G within the urban fabric, because there's limited space and difficulties integrating B&G with existing urban infrastructure and densely populated urban areas. Urban nature needs to compete with grey infrastructure for limited budget. So we need to move from a lowest cost to a maximum value basis. B&G legislation is still very new, with associated challenges to its successful implementation. And the desire to achieve co-benefits could lead to compromised biodiversity outcomes. And often suboptimal governance within local authorities hinders an effective and coordinated approach. The new government brings unknowns regarding its priorities and corresponding funding. So, removing obstacles to planning and development in pursuit of growth may have unintended consequences for the environment. And back to insurers, they perceive a risk in developing products and services that can't or won't be used until compatible projects are identified and developed. And more broadly, a lack of knowledge, expertise, and resources, especially in local authorities and developers, makes it difficult to justify NBS over their grey counterparts. And there's the path dependency of grey infrastructure and the difficulty in changing the current legal and social norms that favour grey projects. So we believe that integrating B&G and natural flood management to enhance urban resilience can best be achieved through appropriate policy measures, better leveraging of insurance solutions, along with research and collaboration. Next slide, please. So what does this mean for policymakers, and what can or should they do now to enable the integration of B&G and urban flood management? Well, I think the overarching goal should be to develop supportive and flexible policies designed to adapt to evolving environmental, social, and economic contexts, ensuring they remain effective over time. Such policies would also ideally incentivize B&G projects with benefits that are distributed fairly across different urban areas and formally recognize co-benefits. In particular, implementing Schedule 3 of the Flood and Water Management Act 2010 would be a positive step forward, which would mean that sustainable drainage systems would be mandatory for most new construction in England. And we hope that the recently concluded consultation on the National Planning Policy Framework will result in a higher profile for flood risk and the promotion of B&G. Next slide, please. And if we look to the insurance sector, so what role can it play to foster the integration of B&G and urban flood management, thereby boosting the incentive for stakeholders to support these projects? Well, in broad terms, I think insurers' envisaged role is to de-risk the B&G investment. So with solutions designed to protect biodiversity and its maintenance or restoration over time. And underpinning those opportunities will be data and models that appropriately and incentivize projects with nature positive effects. Next slide, please. And finally, what are the priority areas with regard to research and collaboration? So given its relative nascence, ongoing research into best practice is needed with the view to informing what good looks like. For example, what co-benefits are possible. Collaboration between urban planners, ecologists, engineers, policymakers is crucial in order to spur innovation and build skill sets, which will also help to identify any capacity constraints across the value chain. Next slide, please. And just to come back to why this should be a priority, the risks and costs of flooding are growing due to climate change and development that wasn't designed to meet the climate resilience and adaptation needs of urban society today. Next slide, please. So to conclude, in England, the introduction of the B&G legislation presents a timely opportunity to boost flood risk management efforts, and in particular to amplify urban flood management. And although flood risk management is devolved to the Scottish Government, no doubt all of the same principles apply equally to Scotland. So in terms of a call to action, we should consider the co-benefits of BNG, for example, climate change adaptation, improved air and water quality, health and well-being. We should move from a lowest cost to a maximum value basis when assessing the holistic value of a development project. And we should integrate BNG into retrofit and refurbishment projects, not just new build. And this opportunity should be seized by policymakers and national and local planning authorities with support from other key actors in the value chain, such as developers, architects, designers, so that ultimately we collectively come to view all projects from the perspective of future generations. The last slide, I believe. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for listening. I hope that some of the key messages around the case for integrating the protection and restoration of biodiversity and flood risk management to enhance urban resilience have resonated with you.